If you ever find a single shoe sitting outside your front door with no explanation, I need you to listen to what happened to me before you assume it's nothing, because I assumed it was nothing too, and I was wrong in a way that still keeps me up some nights. I want to take you back to where this actually started, because the shoe wasn't the beginning. It just felt like the beginning at the time. I was 24 and living alone for the first time in my life. Not roommates, not a partner, just me in a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building that had maybe 12 units total. I loved it. I know that sounds small, but after years of sharing space with people, having a door I could close and know that whatever was on the other side of it was entirely mine, that felt like a luxury. I worked a regular 9 to 5 at the time, nothing dramatic, and most nights I just came home, made dinner, and unwound. My life at that point was about as uneventful as a life can be. I want you to really sit with how normal everything was, because that normalcy is exactly what made the next part so hard to process. It started on a Tuesday. I came home from work and there was a single shoe sitting on the mat outside my door. A sneaker, women's size, slightly worn. Not mine. I don't own anything close to that style. I stood there in the hallway looking at it for a solid minute, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe a neighbor's kid had left it there. Maybe someone had dropped it carrying groceries up the stairs and hadn't noticed. I picked it up, knocked on a couple of my neighbors' doors to see if it belonged to anyone, got no answers, and eventually just set it inside my apartment by the door, thinking whoever lost it might come looking. Nobody came looking. A few days passed, and I genuinely forgot about it. That's important, because I want you to understand how easy it is to let something like this slide right past you when you don't have any reason yet to think it matters. The following week is when things started feeling different. I came home on a Thursday, and there was something taped to my door. A small piece of paper, folded once, with nothing written on the outside. I almost didn't open it right there in the hallway. Something in me wanted to wait until I was inside, with the door locked behind me. And looking back, I think some part of me already understood that whatever this was, it wasn't something I wanted to be standing exposed in a hallway, reading. I went inside, locked the door, and opened it. Written in pencil, in handwriting that looked deliberately neat, almost like someone had practiced it, it said, "I hope you found my shoe." I stood in my kitchen holding that piece of paper for a long time. Because here's the thing, I had told exactly nobody about the shoe. I hadn't mentioned it to a single person. I had picked it up, knocked on 2 doors, and set it inside. Whoever wrote that note either lived close enough to have seen me do that, or knew about it some other way that I couldn't account for. I started locking my door differently after that. I'd always locked it, but I started double-checking. I started looking through the peephole before I opened the door, which I had genuinely never done before in my life. I told myself this was probably some weird, awkward attempt at a joke from a neighbor I didn't know well. I wanted that to be true so badly that I almost talked myself into believing it. Then came the night that changed how seriously I was taking all of this. I was asleep, somewhere around 2 in the morning, and I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately place. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, specific sound, like metal, lightly scraping metal. I lay there in the dark for a few seconds trying to figure out what I was hearing and where it was coming from, and then I realized it was coming from my front door, from the lock. I want you to imagine what that does to your body. Not your mind first, your body. Before you've even had time to think anything through, your whole system goes into this state of total stillness. Like even breathing too loud might give something away. I lay there frozen, listening to this faint metallic sound, and it kept going. Not constant. It would happen, stop, happen again, like someone testing the lock, trying it carefully, patiently, the way you'd try a combination you weren't fully sure of yet. I did not get up right away. I know that might sound strange, but I was genuinely too afraid to move, because moving meant making noise, and making noise meant whoever was on the other side of that door would know I was awake. I lay there for what felt like forever but was probably only a couple of minutes, and then the sound stopped completely. No more scraping, no more testing, just silence. I waited another full minute before I even let myself breathe normally. Then I got up as quietly as I could and went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. No one there. I checked the lock. It was still locked, still secure, nothing visibly damaged. But I did not sleep again that night. I sat on my couch with every light in my apartment on until the sun came up. The next morning, I called my building's property manager and told him what had happened. He was sympathetic but not particularly alarmed, which frustrated me at the time. He said sometimes people get the wrong unit when they're trying to get into their own apartment late at night, especially if they've had a few drinks, and that it was probably an honest mistake by another tenant. I wanted to believe that explanation too. It's funny how many times throughout this whole thing I wanted to believe the harmless version of events. I think most people do. The harmless version doesn't require you to change anything about how you live. But the shoe was already sitting in my apartment, and the note was already in a drawer in my kitchen, and those two things together did not fit neatly into the wrong apartment explanation, no matter how much I wanted them to. About 4 days after the lock incident, I came home from work and found a second note taped to my door. This one made my stomach drop the second I read it, even before I'd fully processed what it said. It read, "I like that you check the peephole now." I stood in that hallway for a long time after reading it, because that meant whoever was doing this had actually watched me do it. Not assumed it, watched it. Which meant they had been close enough, recently enough, to see me through either the door or somewhere in that hallway, checking the peephole the way I had started doing only after the lock incident. I called the police that night and reported everything. The shoe, the first note, the lock, the second note. The officer who came out was polite and took it seriously enough to file a report. But he was honest with me that without a clear suspect or any actual break-in, there wasn't a lot they could immediately do beyond documenting it and advising me to be cautious. He suggested I consider a camera for my door. I bought one the next day and had it installed by that evening. A small battery-powered one that recorded any motion near my doorway and sent it straight to my phone. For about a week, nothing happened. No notes. No sounds at the lock. I started to relax slightly, the way you do when enough time passes that your nervous system starts believing the danger has moved on, even if your rational mind knows that's not necessarily true. Then the camera caught something. It was almost 1 a.m. on a night I happened to still be awake, scrolling on my phone in bed when the notification came through. Motion detected at front door. My stomach dropped before I even opened the app. I pulled up the live feed, and there, standing directly in front of my door, close enough that the camera's night vision washed them out into a grainy, pale outline, was a person. Hood up, standing completely still, facing the door. They weren't doing anything. Not touching the handle, not trying the lock, not moving at all. Just standing there, facing my door, for what the timestamp later showed was almost 4 full minutes. Then they reached up, slowly, and placed something on the doormat. And then they turned and walked away, out of frame, without ever once looking up toward the camera. I sat in my bed staring at my phone screen with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not go to the door. I called the police immediately and told them what I had just watched happen in real time. They told me to stay inside with my door locked and that they would send someone out. It took almost 20 minutes for an officer to arrive, which felt like an eternity sitting alone in that apartment, knowing someone had been standing 4 feet away from me on the other side of a door that suddenly felt much thinner than it ever had before. When the officer finally got there, I let him in and showed him the footage. He went out to check the doormat with me standing well back inside my doorway. It was a small framed photograph of me, taken from outside, through my living room window, on a day I clearly hadn't noticed anyone outside. I was sitting on my couch in the photo, mid-laugh at something on my phone, completely unaware. The picture had been taken close enough and clear enough that you could see the details of the room around me. The officer took the photo as evidence. He told me they would increase patrols near my building and that they'd add this to the existing case file. I asked him directly if he thought I was in danger, and he didn't give me a comforting answer. He told me to consider staying somewhere else for a while if I had the option. I did. I packed a bag that same night and went to stay with my sister for almost 3 weeks. During that time, nothing happened at my apartment that I'm aware of. No notes, no camera alerts, nothing on the doormat. The building manager told me he hadn't noticed anything unusual either. I eventually moved back in, cautiously. Camera still installed, new deadbolt added, blinds kept closed more often than I'd like. For the most part, things stayed quiet after that. I never found out who had been doing it. I never got an explanation for how they knew about the shoe, or how they'd seen me check the peephole, or how they'd gotten close enough to take a photo through my window without me ever noticing them outside. About 2 months later, I moved out of that apartment entirely. Not because anything else happened, but because I realized I had spent 2 straight months sleeping with one ear listening for sounds at my door, and I didn't want to live like that anymore. I don't know if whoever it was simply moved on to someone else, lost interest, or is still out there somewhere thinking about a framed photo of a woman laughing on her couch, completely unaware that she was being watched. I still have that photo, by the way. The police gave me a copy after the investigation went nowhere. I don't know why I kept it. I think some part of me needed proof for myself that I hadn't imagined any of it. The next story is one I almost didn't include here, because unlike most of these, I never actually saw the person responsible, not once. And somehow, that's the part that has stuck with me the longest. I was working nights at the time, a job that had me driving alone through mostly empty streets between 2 and 6 in the morning, dropping off newspapers and certain deliveries to businesses that needed things ready before they opened. It sounds almost quaint now, but at the time it was just a job that fit my schedule and paid decently for not requiring much social interaction, which suited me fine. My route covered a fairly large stretch of a mostly residential and small business area on the edge of town. Quiet streets, a lot of them without much lighting, the kind of stillness that either feels peaceful or unsettling depending entirely on your mood that particular night. For the first several months it was peaceful. I liked the solitude of it. I liked being one of the only people awake in a sleeping town. About 5 months into the job, I started noticing a car. I want to be precise about how this began, because it's important to understand how slowly it crept up on me. The first time I noticed it, I didn't think anything at all. It was just a car parked along one of my regular streets, nothing distinctive, the kind of vehicle you wouldn't remember 5 minutes later under normal circumstances. I noticed it again the next night. Same general area, similar time. Still nothing alarming on its own. Cars get parked overnight all the time. It was the third night that something shifted in my gut, even before my conscious mind had caught up to why. The car was in a slightly different spot this time, a few blocks over, but I recognized it immediately, which surprised me because I'm not usually someone who clocks vehicles that closely. I think my subconscious had already started tracking it before I gave myself permission to actually pay attention. By the second week, I was actively looking for it every night. And every night, it was there, never in the exact same place twice. Always somewhere along my route, always empty as far as I could tell whenever I drove past it. I told a coworker about it during a shift change one morning, half joking, saying I thought I was being haunted by a parked car. He laughed it off and said, maybe somebody on my route had bad luck with their own driveway or something. I laughed too. I wanted it to be that simple. Then one night, about 3 weeks after I'd first started noticing the car, I pulled up to a small print shop that was one of my regular stops. I parked, grabbed the delivery, and was walking up to the door when I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones. On the pavement of the empty lot. I turned around immediately, and there was no one there. Just my own van, parked under the dim light of a street lamp that flickered every few seconds. The lot was otherwise completely empty. I stood there for a moment, my heart rate climbing fast, scanning every shadow I could see, and found nothing. I finished the delivery as quickly as I could and got back in my van. As I was pulling out, my headlights swept briefly across the far end of the lot, and for one single second, I saw something. A shape near the corner of the building, low to the ground, like someone crouched down behind a stack of pallets. By the time I processed what I'd seen and looked again, it was gone. If it had even been there at all. I have never been fully certain whether I actually saw a person or whether my mind, already primed by weeks of unease, had simply manufactured a shape out of shadow and fear. But I didn't go back to check. I drove straight to my next stop and didn't look in my rearview mirror once. which tells you something about how convinced I was in that moment, regardless of what logic might have said afterward. The car kept appearing for another 2 weeks after that night, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I never saw it again on my route. I never found out whose it was, why it had been parked in those specific spots, or whether it had anything to do with the footsteps or the shape near the pallets. I have no resolution to give you here, and that's exactly why this story has stayed with me the way it has. There was no note explaining anything, no camera footage to review, no officer telling me what they'd found, just an absence where there used to be a presence, and no way to ever know what that presence had actually been. I quit that job about 2 months later, for reasons that were mostly unrelated, better pay somewhere else, a more normal schedule. But I won't pretend the timing was a complete coincidence. I think I had simply stopped being able to drive those quiet streets at 3 in the morning without feeling like I was being measured by something I couldn't see. The last story I want to tell you started with a sound so small that if you'd asked me at the time whether it was worth mentioning to anyone, I would have said no. That's what makes it the one I think about most, because it's a perfect example of how something can start as nothing and slowly, carefully become something you can't ignore. I was house-sitting for an older couple in my neighborhood, people I'd known for years, while they were away visiting family for almost 2 weeks. It was the kind of arrangement that felt completely safe on paper. A quiet residential street, a house I'd been inside dozens of times before, neighbors on either side who knew me by name. I genuinely did not expect anything about those 2 weeks to be remarkable in any way. The first few nights were uneventful, in the most boring sense possible. I watered plants, brought in mail, fed their cat, watched television in their living room, and slept in their guest bedroom. Completely unremarkable. It was on the 4th night that I first heard the sound, a faint tapping, coming from somewhere near the back of the house. Not aggressive, not loud, just a soft, rhythmic tap, like fingers lightly drumming against glass. I got up, walked through the dark house to the back door, and looked out into the yard. Nothing. Just the outline of the fence and a few trees swaying gently in the wind. I told myself it was a branch brushing against a window somewhere and went back to bed. I heard it again the next night. Same general time, somewhere close to midnight. This time I made a point of trying to locate exactly where it was coming from before investigating, and I traced it to one of the side windows near the kitchen. Again, when I looked outside, there was nothing visible, no branches close enough to that particular window to explain the sound. That detail bothered me more than I let myself admit at the time. By the 6th night, the tapping had started happening at a slightly different window each time, which is the detail that finally moved this from background unease into something I couldn't rationalize away. A tree brushing a window happens at the same window consistently because the tree doesn't move location. This was moving. Side window one night, back door the next, then a window upstairs that I hadn't even known opened until I checked it that week. I called the homeowners and asked if they had any history of issues like this, anyone who might have a reason to be near the house at night. They were surprised and a little worried and told me they didn't have any idea who it could be, but that they trusted me to use my judgment, including calling the police if I felt it was necessary. On the 8th night, I decided I wasn't going to just lie in bed and wait for the next tap. I sat in the dark living room with the lights off, where I had a partial view of both the front yard and a slice of the side yard through the windows, and I waited. Around 11:40, I saw movement. A figure, moving slowly along the side of the house, sticking close to the fence line where the shadows were deepest. I sat completely still, watching as they moved toward the same side window that had been tapped on a few nights before. They stopped directly beneath it, and then they tapped on the glass. Slowly, deliberately. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I had my phone already in my hand, and I called the police immediately, whispering the situation to the dispatcher as quietly as I could while keeping my eyes locked on the window and the shape outside it. The figure remained at that window for almost a full minute after the tapping stopped, just standing there, motionless, before finally moving away, back along the fence line, and disappearing around the side of a neighboring yard before the police arrived. When officers got there and walked the property with flashlights, they found something near that same window that none of us had noticed before. A small, neatly folded piece of paper, tucked just behind the exterior windowsill, almost hidden unless you were specifically looking. Written on it, in plain block letters, were the words, "Just checking if you're home." That phrase has never left me. Just checking if you're home. Not a threat exactly. Not an explanation either. Just enough to tell me that whoever had been tapping on those windows for over a week had been doing it with full intention, methodically working their way around the house, testing for a response, waiting to see if anyone was inside and awake. The police took the note and increased patrols in the area for the remainder of my time house sitting. Nothing else happened during those final days, though I will tell you I did not get much real sleep for the rest of that stay. I kept every light off at the times I expected the tapping might come, sitting in silence, watching the windows, waiting for a sound that, mercifully, never returned. The homeowners came back from their trip and I told them everything in detail. They were shaken, understandably, and ended up installing motion sensor lighting around the entire perimeter of the house within the month. As far as I know, nothing like that has happened to them since. I never found out who it was. No suspect was ever identified. No further notes ever appeared. And the case, as far as I know, was eventually closed without resolution. I still think about that note sometimes. Just checking if you're home. Such a simple, almost mundane sentence. And yet, it's the thing that comes back to me most clearly out of that entire 2 weeks. Because it tells you that whoever wrote it wasn't acting on impulse. They had a plan. They were patient. And the only reason I know any of this happened at all is because I happened to be sitting in a dark living room on exactly the right night, watching exactly the right window, when they finally showed themselves. I think about how easily I could have just stayed in bed that night instead. I think about it more than I'd like to.